Chapter 9. Man versus Man. Well, Tarzan of the Apes lived on his wild, jungle existence with little change for several years, only that he grew stronger and wiser, and learned from his books more and more of the strange worlds which lay somewhere outside his primeval forest. To him, life was never monotonous or stale. There was always Pizza, the fish, to be caught in the many streams and the little lakes, and Sabor with her ferocious cousins to keep one ever on the alert, and to give zest to every instant that one spent upon the ground. Often they hunted him, and more often he hunted them, but though they never quite reached him with those cruel, sharp claws of theirs, yet there were times when one could scarce have passed a thick leaf between their talons and his smooth hide. Quick was Sabor the lioness, and quick was Numa and Sheeta, but Tarzan of the Apes was lightning. With Tantor the elephant he made friends. How? Well, ask not, but this is known to the denizens of the jungle, that on many moonlight nights Tarzan of the Apes and Tantor the elephant walked together, and where the way was clear Tarzan rode, perched high upon Tantor's mighty back. Many days during these years he spent in the cabin of his father, where still lay untouched the bones of his parents and the skeleton of Kala's body, his baby. At 18 he read fluently, and understood nearly all he read in the many and varied volumes on the shelves. Also, he could write, with printed letters, rapidly and plainly, but script he had not mastered, for, though there were several copybooks among his treasure, there was so little written English in the cabin that he saw no use for bothering with the other form of writing, though he could read it laboriously. Thus, at 18, we find him an English lordling, who could speak no English, and yet who could read and write his native language. Never had he seen a human other than himself, for a little area traversed by his tribe was watered by no greater river to bring down the savage natives of the interior. High hills shut it off on 3 sides, the ocean on the 4th, and it was alive with lions and leopards and poisonous snakes. Its untouched mazes of matted jungle had, as yet, invited no hardy pioneer from the human beasts beyond its frontier. But as Tarzan of the Apes sat one day in the cabin of his father, delving into the mysteries of a new book, the ancient security of his jungle was broken forever. At the far eastern confine, a strange cavalcade strung in single file over the brow of a low hill. In advance, there were 50 black warriors armed with slender wooden spears with ends hard baked over slow fires, and long bows and poisoned arrows. And on their backs were oval shields, in their noses huge rings, while from the kinky wool of their heads protruded tufts of gay feathers. Across their foreheads were tattooed 3 parallel lines of color, and on each breast 3 concentric circles. Their yellow teeth were filed to sharp points, and their great protruding lips added still further to the low and bestial brutishness of their appearance. Following them were several hundred women and children, the former bearing upon their heads great burdens of cooking pots, household utensils, and ivory, and in the rear were 100 warriors, similar in all respects to the advance guard. That they were more greatly feared an attack from the rear than whatever unknown enemies lurked in their advance was evidenced by the formation of the column, and such was the fact, for they were fleeing from the white man's soldiers, who had so harassed them for rubber and ivory, that they had turned upon their conquerors one day and massacred a white officer and a small detachment of his black troops. For many days they had gorged themselves on meat, but eventually a stronger body of troops had come and fallen upon their village by night to revenge the death of their comrades. Well, that night the black soldiers of the white man had had a meat aplenty, and this little remnant of a once powerful tribe had slunk off into the gloomy jungle toward the unknown and freedom. But that which meant freedom and the pursuit of happiness to these savage blacks meant consternation to death to many of the wild denizens of their new home. For 3 days the little cavalcade marched slowly through the heart of this unknown and untracked forest, until finally, early on the 4th day, they came upon a little spot near the banks of a small river, which seemed less thickly overgrown than any ground they had yet encountered. Here they set to work to build a new village, and in a month a great clearing had been made. Huts and palisades erected, plantains, yams, and maize planted, and they had taken up their old life in their new home. Here and there were no white men, no soldiers, nor any rubber or ivory to be gathered for cruel and thankless taskmasters. Several moons passed by ere the blacks ventured far into the territory surrounding their village, and several had already fallen prey to old Sabor, and because the jungle was so infested with these fierce and bloodthirsty cats, and with lions and leopards, the ebony warriors hesitated to trust themselves far from the safety of their palisades. But one day, Kulonga, a son of the old king Bonga, wandered far into the dense mazes to the west. Warily he stepped, his slender lance ever ready, his long oval shield firmly grasped, and his left hand close to his sleek ebony body. At his back, his bow, and in the quiver upon his shield many slim straight arrows, well smeared with a thick dark tarry substance that rendered deadly their tiniest needle prick. Night found Kulonga far from the palisades of his father's village, but still headed westward, and climbing into the fork of a great tree, he fashioned a rude platform and curled himself up for sleep. 3 miles to the west slept the tribe of Kerchak. Now early the next morning the apes were astir, moving through the jungle in search of food. Tarzan, as was his custom, prosecuted his search in direction of the cabin, so that by leisurely hunting on the way his stomach was filled by the time he reached the beach. The apes scattered by ones and twos and threes in all directions, but ever within sound of a signal of alarm. Kala had moved slowly along an elephant track toward the east, and was busily engaged in turning over rotted limbs and logs in search of succulent bugs and fungi, when the faintest shadow of a strange noise brought her to startled attention. For 50 yards before her the trail was straight, and down this leafy tunnel she saw the stealthy advancing figure of a strange and fearful creature. It was Kulonga. Nakala did not wait to see more, but turning more rapidly back along the trail, she did not run, but, after the manner of her kind when not aroused, sought rather to avoid than escape. Close after her came Kulonga. Here was meat. He could make a killing and feast well this day, and on he hurried, his spear poised for the throw. At a turning of the trail he came in sight of her again, upon another straight stretch. His spear hand went far back. The muscles rolled lightning-like beneath the sleek hide. Out shot the arm, and the spear sped toward Kala. A poor cast. It but grazed her side, and with a cry of rage and pain, the she-ape turned upon her tormentor. In an instant the trees were crashing beneath the weight of her hurrying fellows, swinging rapidly toward the scene of trouble in answer to Kala's scream. As she charged, Kulonga unslung his bow and fitted an arrow with almost unthinkable quickness. Drawing the shaft far back, he drove the poised missile straight into the heart of the great anthropoid. With a horrid scream, Kala plunged forward upon her face and before the astonished members of her tribe. Roaring and shrieking, the apes dashed toward Kulonga, but that wary savage was fleeing down the trail like a frightened antelope. He knew something of the ferocity of these wild, hairy men, and his one desire was to put as many miles between himself and them as he possibly could. They followed him, racing through the trees for a long distance, but finally, one by one, they abandoned the chase and returned to the scene of the tragedy. None of them had ever seen a man before, other than Tarzan, and so they wondered vaguely what strange manner of creature it might be that invaded their jungle. On the far beach by the little cabin, Tarzan heard the faint echoes of the conflict, and knowing that something was seriously amiss among the tribe, he hastened rapidly toward the direction of the sound. When he arrived, he found the entire tribe gathered jabbering about the dead body of his slain mother. Tarzan's grief and anger were unbounded. He roared out his hideous challenge time, and again He beat upon his great chest, and with clenched fists, and then he fell upon the body of Kala, and sobbed out the pitiful sorrow of his lonely heart. To lose the only creature in all his world who had manifested love and affection for him was the greatest tragedy he had ever known. What though Kala was a fierce and hideous ape? To Tarzan, she had been kind. She had been beautiful. Upon her, he had lavished, unknown to himself, all the reverence and respect and love a normal English boy feels for his own mother. He had never known another, and so to Kala was given, though mutely, all that would have belonged to the fair and lovely Lady Alice had she lived. After the first outburst of grief, Tarzan controlled himself, and questioning the members of the tribe who had witnessed the killing of Kala, he learned all that their meager vocabulary could convey. It was enough. However, for his needs, it told him of a strange, hairless black ape with feathers growing upon its head, who launched death from a slender branch, and then ran with the fleetness of Bara, the deer, toward the rising sun. Tarzan waited no longer, but leaping into the branches of the trees, sped rapidly through the forest. He knew the windings of the elephant trail along which Kala's murderer had flown, and so he cut straight through the jungle to intercept the black warrior, who was evidently following the tortuous detours of the trail. At his side was the hunting knife of his unknown sire, and across his shoulders the coils of his own long rope. In an hour, he struck the trail again, coming to the earth, and examined the soil minutely.